On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Michelle King. She's the head of people and talent at Notable Health. We're going to be talking about a strong relationship with the CEO. We're going to be talking about what that looks like and how do you develop it the right way? How are you business savvy in the role of a head of people and talent, as well as pushing back and business objectives? And we're going to try to fit in as much as we can with Michelle, some learning lessons. I do appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. All right. So this is a great topic. I think, obviously, when we talk about a strong relationship with the CEO, I think most everyone in people and talent wants to believe that they have one. And we're going to find out what a healthy relationship looks like. And maybe we'll start off with that as a first question. When we're talking about having a healthy relationship with the executive team, especially the CEO, tell us what that looks like. What is a healthy relationship?
From my perspective and in my experience, when you have a healthy relationship with the ELT, and especially the CEO, there is that clear understanding of the strategic value that the people team and the people executive brings to the table. And making sure that we are there to support the business and make sure that we understand how the business runs and operates, right? And so I think a lot of times what ends up happening is you come in and there's so much to get done, you forget that you are also kind of that business partner and that strategic partner to the ELT. And so being able to dive in and spend some time with them, understanding the business and those pieces, having that relationship where they come to you when they're dealing with change, they're dealing with any of the things that come up in their business, but also so that you are seen as a strategic partner to them as you're starting to develop the what are we going to do and how are we going to do things differently in the organization. And I always feel like there's a little bit of healthy tension there, right? Our role in HR is to ensure that we're fostering the culture and the people and growing and developing and retaining the talent that we want. And so there should also be that healthy balance of the business has needs and the executive leadership team has needs. The CEO has kind of his perspective or her perspective on what they're looking for. And your job is to help balance that out and give them a unique perspective or a different way of looking at that. And so you want to have a relationship where there's a lot of trust and honesty and ability to hold each other accountable and have those really hard conversations when necessary.
I guess when it comes to, that healthy relationship, and obviously everyone wants to have that with the executive team, with the CEO, especially if you're in a head of position. Where does that start? Does it start from the interview process when you're first looking at the role? Does it start when you're in the job? When do you start building that relationship?
I definitely feel it like it's before you even get there, right? How many of us have taken a job at some point in our life and looked back and known it wasn't a good job during the interview process? There was something in your gut or something there that was like, I don't know if this is the right thing for me, but we don't always ask those right questions, right? And so knowing and understanding early on, even before you become an employee, like what does that relationship start to look like? How does the leadership team work together? What's working on the ELT and what's not? And also making sure that there's that strong alignment with you and the CEO about how you communicate things, how they see the world, and what they need and want from you. And we've set that up in advance. Because once you get there, there's already this expectation of what you're going to bring, or there's already all the things that need to get done. And you're going to strengthen that relationship, obviously, but having built that trust on the upfront and having a clear alignment and understanding of this is the place I'm supposed to be. I can see the strengths and development opportunities for all of the ELT before I walk in the door actually gives me a really strong opportunity to hit the ground running, right? If I'm waiting till I get there, or you're in an interview process and you don't get to meet all of the ELT, there's always a question of like, how do they work together? And so I always ask those questions in the upfront to make sure I get a really good sense, not just from the CEO, they have their perspective, but also talking with those ELT members to understand how they all get along, how they hold each other accountable, like what is the conversation that happens in the room, because that will tell you a lot about the culture that goes on beneath them.
I guess, I maybe want to dive into that a little bit more, actually. You mentioned it starts before you take the job, through the interview process, through seeing how others work with others at that leadership level. When you're looking at that dynamic, are there things that you should be looking for that should be a cause for concern? Because I think a lot of times people are very optimistic, they're excited. It's a new beginning, and we're all told we should be interviewing the people we're actually going to work for as well. I don't know if it always happens, but especially at this leadership level, are there things you should be looking at to make sure that red flags for, hey, this could be a relationship that'll be less than optimal?
For me, it's a trust relationship, right? If when I was interviewing for my position at Notable Health, I asked every executive, what are the tough conversations you have at ELT? What are the tough conversations you have with your peers? What do those look like? How do we give each other feedback? Because you can tell, like, high performing teams are built on a foundation of trust. And so you can have really hard conversations. You can have disagree and commit conversations. You can do all of those things if there's a level of trust built. And that is always, for me, the biggest flag. You really want to make sure that you understand what you're walking into from how well does this team trust each other? And how well does this team believe that the people in the room are going to do what they say they're going to do, are competent in doing their job, and really believe that we have the right leaders at the table? And so anytime I'm interviewing, especially at this level, there is a lot of conversation to understand, for me, what the level of trust looks like. And I always ask for an example, like, what's the hardest conversation you've had with your peer? Or what's the hardest conversation we've recently had at ELT? So that I get a good sense of truly how open are they to having tough conversations, and how much trust is actually built there, or where are we in the process of building that?
Fantastic advice. When you get into the role, obviously, that's where a lot of the hard work begins. And maybe, I don't know if this is relevant, but I guess in that first 30, 60, 90 days, and I don't want this to turn into what happens when we first take a role, but I'm actually interested. Like, when you first are into a job and you're trying to build those foundations correct, what are you trying to do with that relationship with the CEO? And the reason I ask is, obviously, within the people talent role, we're all in service of the business, and I hear that a lot. How that gets executed, it looks very different depending on who you talk to. But those first 90 days, what do you do to establish the right channels, authority, those leadership qualities that you're going to need down the road in dealing with the CEO and the other executives?
For me, it's diving in and understanding the business holistically. Like, really, really need to have the foundations of how the business operates and runs. I think that where the feedback that I've heard a lot, and I know you mentioned it, and we'll get there and chat about it a little bit, is that a lot of times HR comes in and has this initiative, like the people function has to do performance reviews, and we have to hire people, and we have to set up org design and development and compensation strategies. And we do need to do all of those things. We have to do it from a lens of what is best for the business right now. And I don't think there's a one size fits all. I think performance looks different at every company I've ever worked for, regardless of size or industry. It always looks a little unique depending on the company. Compensation strategies and benefit strategies and retention, all of those things really are dependent on the organization. And so for me, where I've been able to, I think, move the needle fastest is when your peers, but especially the CEO, believe and understand that you know about the business, and that when they come to you with an issue or a problem, you're putting it through the lens of your people hat and also your business leader hat. That we're looking at this for, how do we come to some compromise, or how do we come to a place where we're supporting the culture and the people and the things that we need to on that side of the house, that also supports where we're at from a business perspective. And I think that a lot of times that's the piece that gets missed. It's like, this is how we should treat people. And we shouldn't, for me, there's no should. Every company I've also worked for, their culture is different. The way people work is different. And the way you look at talent. And so if you spend those first 30, 60, 90 days, really diving in to understand the business holistically, understand each parts of the organization and how they feed up to that. And during that time, you're kind of on this listening tour, right, for employees and your leaders about what's working in the people function and what's not. You really start to recognize all the ways in which you can impact the business from a positive perspective. And so a lot of times, I've joked with CEOs before that the viewpoint of the people team is it's a cost center. It just costs us money. And I would argue actually quite the opposite. We find the right people and we ensure we don't have to do that over and over again. We keep them happy so that they're continuing to push the business. And so I feel like we actually, if you look at our EVP from beginning to end, really are having an ROI positive impact. And being able to speak to that with your data and in your conversations with them is going to be incredibly important. And if you don't have the business fundamentals down, it makes it really hard to speak their language and to meet them where they are with the challenges they're trying to face in the business.
I like to extend this because I think that there's something here that I've heard a lot of times, and I don't know if we discuss it enough, because I do know in the role, there's a lot of process, right? Within the people and talent function, there is process, but I'd also argue there's a lot of process in every other department. I mean, software engineering has a very defined process. I mean, it is what it is. What you just articulated was the stronger your business acumen, and I don't know if this is going to be what I'm going to take it back. I'm going to let you answer. The stronger potentially your relationship with the leadership team, because you are out there and you're putting forth those business problems to solve, which is what they care about. They don't care what our process looks like behind the hood with the people, talent, whatever your ATS or your scorecard. They don't really care, but they do want to know what the business problems you're solving. Is that a strong driver for this relationship? I guess that trust component, that they can trust you with those ideas?
I believe it's fundamental. I mean, we can't create a performance improvement process or a performance review process or a talent and compensation process without coming at it from the place of what are the business drivers? Like, where are we at in our maturity and our business? We've got to meet people where they are. And every organization, I mean, I've started at several companies that are 2 to 250. And in a lot of places, you would think, well, when you're this big, this is what you need in order to be successful. This is how you set up compensation, or this is how you set up engagement. And what I will say is it's actually been incredibly different at every place. And so the more that they know that you are meeting them where they are in that moment, the business and the people, the better the process that you design, people will get on board faster, right? Because they understand the impact it's going to have to the things that they have to end up delivering. I recently implemented a talent planning process at Notable, and there was a lot of question: do we need this now? We're small. We're a little over 200 people. Is this something we really need to do? And what I was able to do, knowing the business so well, was to say, here's how this is going to help us. Here's how this sets a foundation for us as we grow. It's much easier to implement and do now when we're 200 as opposed to when we're 500. And so here's all the value you're going to get out of knowing your talent in a new way that you've never looked at them before, so that we can also tweak our compensation strategy around how do we retain people long-term? How do we reward them in the best right way? And then it started to click for them, right? Like, oh, if I can retain my key talent faster and I know it ahead of time, we get ahead of it instead of being flat-footed or trying to dive and save. That resonated with a lot of them. So as we started talking through these talent flags and how we use that process to grow and develop people and retain them long-term, they can immediately start to see that business value. And so it's those pieces that, yes, we have to put some of those processes in place. But if we do it from the lens of, here's the business value, here's how I'm going to help your organization. It's not just the company. It's like, here's the pain I've heard you're having in this engineering team. Here's what we're going to do to solve it. And here's how we're going to know who the people are in the right roles that we need to do something differently for. And that is really helping them to see their talent in a new light and showing them the path to being able to meet their objectives.
I love that. And to kind of expand on that, I guess, the conversation for, let's say, the last 20 years notably had been a seat at the table, my view was no one gives anyone a seat at the table. If you know business, you come to the table with business solutions to business problems. You don't have to raise your hand, especially at a certain level. What I have seen is that there is a bit of a split into the side of people in talent that's very good with process, and I think almost sometimes hides behind process. And you have to be good at process, but I think there's a comfort there. And then there's the other side that is more focused business driven, everything you've just said. There's a gap. Is that where do we come up with a solution to that? And the reason I'm asking is that a question and an answer to, we need more leaders to promote focusing on the business. We don't incorporate people earlier in their careers into the business because we're telling them to do all these process oriented things, and then they become leaders, and that's what they've been comfortable with. Where do we start addressing leaders and people and talent having more impact on the business?
I think for me, it does start, like, we have to grow that as chief people officers and CHROs who are responsible for those things. As we are growing our talent, as we are starting to bring our leaders up in the different functions, giving them that holistic view of the business is incredibly important. And I think that what happens is a lot of times we get siloed. It's like a business partner is a business partner, right? And this is their job. When in reality, a strong business partner needs to have an operational background, or at least get to learn and understand the operational side of the house, because that supports them being strong strategic partners. And the inverse is also true, right? On the operations front, where to your point, a lot of it is very process driven and it's very systems driven, and this is how we look at the world. When we start to say we're going to implement a new system, for example, we just did an HRIS implementation. It was, we want this to be able to do this because this is what's going to support the leaders in the business and knowing and understanding their talent differently. And so they have to also get this strategic lens of, this is not just building a system for the sake of having a system. This is building a system for the sake of giving data and information and teaching people how to fish and giving them more self-service options. And so I think there is this component of, we have to do it early on, and we have to keep infusing all of the people on our team in tying it back to the vision and tying it back to our goals and expectations. The other part of that, I would say, is finding organizations that you can influence and you can spend time really getting to know the business and show them this side of the people function and a people leader is incredibly important. And so I would argue that what you said is probably correct around like a seat at the table. I also kind of feel like if I want it, I'm going to take it, and then we can talk about whether I should stay here or not. So that's my approach to it. But the way that you get to stay there and you have those conversations is by building that trust. And I am by no means an engineer. I don't speak engineering. I couldn't code if you asked me to. But I have supported enough engineering leaders and organizations in my life that I know what a good, strong org looks like and how we build it and grow it. And so when I can have those conversations with the engineering leader, they're like, right, you get where my heartburn is, or you get how I'm looking at this world. And you become their partner then, rather than the person that they come to just say, I need to hire more of this, or I need to get rid of this person. You are actually strategically helping them shape their org for the next 6, 12, 18 months. And I think that like, as people leaders, we have to do the work first and make sure that we're having those conversations and that we're actually building that strategic relationship so that we can continue to push that down the road. I would say early in my career, people didn't do that. I was a very curious person, so I would ask a lot of questions and lean in. But I also had some experiences really early in my career that shaped me to say, you don't know the business, so you can't be here like telling us what we should and shouldn't be doing. And it was very jarring for me because I was good at my job, but it was that reflection where I ended up spending a lot of time sitting in the business, because then it made me a better strategic partner. So then when I rolled things out or I went to them with initiatives, they were like, right, she knows how this will work for us or not work for us. And so that was a probably a very pivotal moment in my life. And it was a was a tough feedback conversation, and it actually changed the trajectory of the way I think about partnering with the business.
Fantastic story, by the way. I appreciate you sharing. And, I think you said something in there that about you don't know how engineering's done. And it's irrelevant. I think when it comes to a lot of technical based companies, I don't want to call them software companies, but companies that deal in technology, obviously the engineering part is steep, right? I think it's complicated. I mean, I'm a former software engineer, and I still, at this point, technology's passed me by, and I'm like, wow, this has gotten too complicated. But to the point you made, that it's not about that. The org development, the rest of the facets of your job, understanding the business problem, understanding how to solve that problem. I would argue marketing has that same issue. Accounting, finance has that same issue. There isn't a unit in the business that doesn't have that issue. And I feel like what I just heard was, you have to literally imagine that you are solving the business problem. Don't worry about the process, because if you get stuck in the process, that you're done, you're gone. And then come up with those ideas and be able to back them up. And I think that's great advice. The one follow-up to that, and I've asked this many times, and I'm not sure that I've ever gotten a good answer. I understand it. But a lot of times in the people talent space, I hear you have to say yes to the leaders that are making the requests, because obviously we're in service of the business. I'm here to facilitate. They're the domain expert. I'm here to support them. My counter to that is accounting, finance is in the same position. Again, marketing's in the same position. They're not going to say yes if you tell them, hey, I think you should run marketing this way. They're not going to do that. They're going to maybe go, okay, let me see why you have this opinion. But when it comes to these situations of pushing back and not saying, well, I'm going to listen to you just to fail and then come back to you, how is that solved for our industry?
Early in my career, I had this leader who taught me about being a consultant. And so she was like, you never say no. The answer is yes. And here are all the trade-offs you have to make. And I implored that for a long time. I actually don't think it always works. I think you do have to say no sometimes. I think you have to say, I have a different perspective than you. And right now you're in this situation because now you've gotten this narrow-minded way of looking at the world, right? You see this from a finance perspective or from a marketing perspective. My job, and why you bring in a strong head of people, is because I have to see across all of the organizations. So I'm going to give you this unique perspective that you might not have. And here's how we're going to solve it together to solve your problem. But that doesn't mean we're always going to do it the way that you think it needs to be done. And so I believe that it's not like I'm saying, nope, you can't do that. But I will say, I don't think we're going to approach it that way. Here's all the risks, and here's why I'm saying no. Here's a better way for us to do it and think about it. And let's collaborate and have a conversation about how we make this work that solves for both of us. But this isn't I'm just going to, like you said, I've seen too many leaders who are like, fine, if you want to do it that way. Then when you fail and it doesn't work, come back to me. And that hurts the business. It hurts long-term. It hurts the employees. It hurts the culture. And so I think not having that strong relationship is how we end up in situations. Like I've heard a number of people leaders who say, I told the CEO we shouldn't do that layoff, but we did it anyway. And here's how we ended up in this position. And my argument is I'm going to go in there and say, if we do this, I can't support it and get behind it. And here's why. It doesn't mean I won't execute on it if you need me to, because ultimately, right, there's a disagree and commit conversation. But I need to vehemently be the preserver of our culture and our business. And I have a fiduciary duty to say, here's what's going to happen to us in 12 and 18 months if we do it this way. And here's a better way to do it that still achieves the business outcomes, but maybe is not the way that you're looking at it. And I think that there has to be that pushback. I think that if you are a people leader who just says yes in the background, you will never have, quite honestly, that strength of like, this person strategically knows things better than I do, right? We all have our strengths. We all have those things. If you continue to say yes to everything, you become known as that person. And then it's just like, I actually don't come to you for a strategic perspective. I'm just coming to you to execute. You become an order taker, not a strategic partner. And I'm not willing to do that. That's not the job I want. It's not the job I want to be in. And I have walked away from organizations where I've just not been able to influence the leaders and not been able to, work with the CEO in that way. And for me, it's like, it's my reputation too in my life. So I can't do things that make me feel like we're not doing the right thing for the business as a whole. That's my job, is to protect the business.
How do you set that stage that you're hiring somebody that's going to push back? Because I think that it's funny. So we're an external recruiting company. I sometimes forget that we're not being hired for head of talent and people roles. When we go through the due diligence phase, we're like, we're going to tell you if this should not be done. And a lot of times they're like, aren't you just an external recruiting? You should say yes to everything, right? I'm like, no, that's not how it works. So I'm like, as an external person, that's our mindset. I'm like, I'm going to tell you no, and I'm going to tell you as a consultant what you should believe. I don't interview for these head of people talent roles, but when you're going through that process, and you want to establish that there might be a no. I mean, do you talk about that? Do you early on in the interview process say, hey, by the way, listen, when you hire me, I might push back. I might not be happy. I might not agree. These are my philosophies, and we might have to close the door and whiteboard and, knock down, drag them out for an hour or two to get to consensus. Is that what should be done, or what should be done to kind of let people know that's your personality, and that's what you're expecting from your authority standpoint?
Yes, on both sides. I don't believe in surprising people. And I say this to candidates when I interview them. I'm incredibly transparent because I don't want you to be surprised. When you walk in the door, you should be like, yep, this is what I was expecting is going to happen. Being a candidate is the same way. I want the CEO and that executive team to know what to expect from me when I walk in the door as their partner. And so I will talk a lot about how I worked with individuals in the past, where we've agreed and where we've disagreed, and kind of my philosophy and approach to disagreement, right? And we have to have tough conversations. It's actually where the goodness happens. It expands the perspective of both sides. But it is incredibly important to let people know who you are so that they're not surprised when you walk in the door, and that they can expect that from you day one. I am an observer. I want to listen, but there used to be this philosophy of, don't make changes in the first 60 or 90 days and go and just listen. And I'm like, the business moves faster than that, especially in tech startups. You can't, 90 days is a lifetime. And so it's like, get in, learn fast, build those relationships quickly, build trust, because you're going to have to move quickly and you're going to have to do those things. And if that's what you want, you have to tell people what to expect from you. You get to also teach them how to work with you. And so from day one, or even day one, right, during that interview process, teaching them how you will show up as a partner for them, including that pushback, is important so that you both make the right decision. You don't want to go to an organization that also is not willing to engage in those conversations, right? It's just like, I'm asking you to be the order taker. That's not what you're looking for. You should make sure that they understand that's not the way that you operate.
Brilliant, Michelle. I know I got to let you get back to actually doing your day job and taking care of the business, but I really appreciate the insights and taking the time here. We might have spurred more questions than we answered. I don't know. I think you did a great job explaining, but I'm sure there will be more. Is there a good way of touching base with you to follow up with you or kind of ask you anything that maybe spurred that question from the podcast?
Absolutely. I hope we spurred some questions. That's the name of the game. That's what we want to do. Yes, definitely reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm Michelle Joy King on LinkedIn. You can find me there, and I'm happy to engage in this conversation and happy to chat with anyone who has a unique perspective or is in the same position.
Fantastic. I do appreciate the time. And that's it for this episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, we spoke about a strong relationship with the CEO. I think Michelle gave us some great insights. We actually went full cycle from what to do when you're in the interview process, what to do when you're in a job, looking back in terms of how to establish that authority and being able to push back into the conversations that are tough that you need to be having. I like talking about the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and this is one of those topics that are actually really important to me. So I really appreciated Michelle's transparency and sharing as much as she did. So share this with somebody else who might benefit. I'd really appreciate that. Also, like, subscribe, comment, leave me a review for how the podcast is going. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.